do they call you?
I am Worf, son of Borg.
Hi guys, Kidru64 here, and today we're going to be talking about the time the Star Trek The Next Generation crew met the Uncanny X-Men. Yes, this happened. This happened in the 90s. This was like the peak X-Men, peak Star Trek. I, as a kid, I was walking through the grocery store. Back then, they used to have a book section, a big magazine section in the grocery store. Walking through the grocery store, I came across a novel, Star Trek X-Men. Planet X. Yes, this existed, guys. So I picked it up and I read this and I loved it. But one thing that always confused me, keep in mind, I didn't have a computer. The internet was not around back then, so you couldn't just look this stuff up. But they allude to the fact that the X-Men have already met the Star Trek crew in this, and the vice versa. So I was like, wait a minute. Was this a sequel? Yes, it was a sequel to a comic book, which I would find out years later and pick up and finally get the rest of the story. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. This particular issue of Star Trek The Next Generation meets X-Men, titled Second Contact, and it's titled that for a very specific reason, which we're going to get into here in a minute. I am a big Star Trek fan, okay? Especially in the 90s. I love the way Star Trek was in the 90s. DS9, TNG, Voyager. We got good movies. We got First Contact, and I watched Star Trek Next Generation when I was on TV. It used to be on at 4 and 5 o'clock. Every single weekday, and I'd usually watch it. And X-Men that's the team that got me into comics. X-Men's what got me into comics. The 90s was peak for the X-Men, and it was peak for Star Trek. So getting this crossover at the height of their popularity is just great. It's great. So how did this crossover happen? Okay, here's how it happened. The Star Trek property, as far as in the comics, has hopped around for years and years, much like how the toy line works. So Star Trek's never really got their merchandise or auxiliary stuff ever together. It hops around from comic publisher to comic publisher, and in 96, Marvel ended up getting the rights to Star Trek to publish the comic. And what they did was they put this little Paramount logo up here in the corner, and this logo was used in coordination with the Marvel logo on the Star Trek comics. And because Marvel was publishing Star Trek, that's what allowed this crossover to happen. So the plan was put in place to do a comic book and then do a novel. And for the comic book to write into the novel. And there's some extras at the end of this comic that kind of fill in the blanks of the creative aspects going into setting up for the book. So that's pretty interesting. Now, this still, even though I read the novel and I was like, hey, there's a prequel to this, which is this. There was another prequel before that. This one right here, which had the X-Men meeting up with the OG Star Trek crew, Kirk, Spock, and Bones, and the rest. So, yeah, there was 3 crossovers of Star Trek X-Men. But again, the one we're going to be talking about today is this one, because Star Trek TNG is my crew, and this is the one I want to talk about today. If you guys are interested in the other one, definitely let me know, and I might do a video on it as well. So that's kind of how this happened. That's how I found out about it. That's how how Marvel was able to write this story. And how I'm going to do this is I'm going to walk through the story with you guys, give a little review at the end, and then kind of recap with you. And this will be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to this. But I like talking about positive stuff, so that's why we're talking about this today. Let's get into this. So first we're going to look at the setup. So in the setup, we're going to be looking at the specific teams involved and where it fits into their respective timelines, because there's lots of continuity in Star Trek and X-Men, and it's important to see where this series actually fits in with their continuity. So this crossover takes place immediately following the events of First Contact. Yes, this is one of my favorite Star Trek movies, arguably my favorite Star Trek movie, and easily the best Next Generation movie. So it's nice that they actually use some of the great Star Trek stuff to piggyback off, to bounce off of, to get us into this comic crossover, and that's important to note because the Borg are involved in the crossover. So just keep that in mind as we talk about this going forward and we get into the story. All Star Trek fans know the TNG crew, but I'm going to go ahead and point them out just so you guys will know. You have Geordi, you got Troy, Crusher, Data, Worf, Riker, and of course, Captain Picard.
Previously on X-Men.
Now with the X-Men, it's a little bit different. They have a huge roster, and you can have different team members on each comic book. No matter what comic book you pick up, you're probably going to get a whole completely different configuration of the X-Men. So it's important to talk about the X-Men that they chose to use in this crossover. They picked Storm, Wolverine, Nightcrawler, Colossus, Shadowcat, Angel, and Banshee. Now, I actually like Banshee. But he's a pretty random X-Men to throw in there, if I do say so myself. Now, maybe if I was picking the team, I might sub out Banshee and Angel for Iceman and Beast, or maybe throw Gambit and Rogue in there instead. For the most part, I really like the X-Men that they chose to utilize in this story. It's got some of my favorites in there. But the main reason why they went with this particular configuration was because continuity-wise, this takes place around the time of Onslaught. So this was the Heroes Reborn era in the comics, so the comic fans will probably remember that from the 90s. But Onslaught, for those who don't know, he basically is a villain who was a conglomeration of Magneto and Xavier's psyches manifest, essentially, into an Onslaught villain, which caused a lot of havoc around the Marvel universe back then. So it's not really important because it's not really mentioned in the comic, but it's important because it actually seemed, I think that's really what impacted them making the decisions they made with the X-Men that they did, because typically you have Cyclops in these stories because Cyclops is the leader of the X-Men, but I like that him and Jean and some of the other players are not really in this because it gives pushes Storm to the forefront as the team leader, and Storm is possibly my favorite X-Men. Storm may be my favorite X-Men. I like the fact that she gets pushed forward as leader in this, and so that's something I really like. But because this takes place during Onslaught, the other thing you also get as a byproduct is that Xavier isn't in the comic, and that kind of sucks because you don't get that Captain Picard meeting Professor Xavier. And you got to keep in mind, this was well before he was announced to play Professor Xavier in the X-Men movie. So it was very interesting. Now they do mention it. I will say they do mention it in this book. If I ever get a chance to talk about this in a movie, you do get that meet up in that, which is very cool. But you don't get it in this comic. So again, that's kind of goes in line with where Onslaught is. So it has impact, even though it's not necessarily mentioned in this comic. So that's kind of where we are time-wise. This is immediately following the events of First Contact. The Star Trek crew meeting the X-Men at the X-Mansion in the Marvel Universe during the Onslaught era. That's the setup. So with all that said, let's go ahead and get into the story. One thing that's really good about this comic, and was really good about comics back in the day, was every once in a while you'd get these foldouts, or you'd get something at least with some information about the characters that were in the comics, some point in the continuity that they were in relation to other comics that were out at the time. This was mostly done by the editors. This kind of thing doesn't happen in comic books anymore. So this is really cool that you have this fold out that basically explains, what's happening as you pick up with them on the bridge of the Enterprise with Data's face half off. This basically explains to the reader, even if you haven't read or watched the movie, what's happening. And as you can see, this takes place immediately following First Contact. When they make the jump to go back to their regular timeline, they are diverted, and hence the name Second Contact, because it takes place right after First Contact. Yeah, see what they did there? Of course, Data relays that they are at Earth, but circa late 1990s. Again, this goes back to editor's notes here. Geordi is talking about them having to eject a deflector dish, and then there's a little reference here, First Contact. So you know that this is in reference to something that happened in First Contact. And it's really cool that they have that continuity to the movie, because that's a part in the movie, and it's tying into the story here. And then Riker here is talking about Shi'ar technology, which is an alien empire in the Marvel Universe. Why does Riker know what the Shi'ar Empire is? Well, it's because they met each other in that first comic with James Kirk. So the X-Men have met them. So that exchange happened. So Starfleet has knowledge of the Shi'ar Empire weapons and technology because of that comic. So it even ties back to a previous comic. And of course, they go ahead and decide to send out an away team, which is standard Star Trek fare. That's the way it's supposed to go. Worf's in jeans here, and he's complaining about how uncomfortable they are. Worf kind of looks like a G.I. Joe here. G.I. Joe! They do have a mention of the eugenics war that happened in the late 1990s, and it's cool that they're even keeping up with Trek continuity. Not only are they keeping up with X-Men continuity, they're keeping up with like Trek continuity because, according to Star Trek continuity, the eugenics war happened the turn of the century. So anyway, they're in front of the Baxter Building, and what the Baxter Building is where the Fantastic Four is headquartered, but at this point in time, the Thunderbolts had taken it over, and again, that is referenced in the editor's notes here. Not much comes out of that other than the fact that they just beam down and then they beam back, and that's pretty much all you get out of that. Then we switch back to the X-Men and the X-Mansion, and they're having their X-Men banter here. And Geordi and Data, as well as Troy, beam down, and they're going around the X-Mansion, and I think that they're looking for Cerebro here. Yep, they're looking for Cerebro. Troy senses something, and it's probably Wolverine about to stab Geordi. That's probably what's happening here. And you can probably already notice from this specific picture that Wolverine has the bone claws. I hate the bone claws. At this point in time, Wolverine had bone claws, but man, I really wish he had adamantium, and this is actually carried over into the novel. He still has the bone claws. Man, if he had adamantium, I'd just like to see Starfleet, check out his adamantium and that alloy. I think that'd be cool. Anyway, Data shows up and basically just grabs Wolverine and just tosses him away like he's nothing. Then Colossus shows up, and this is where Data should be like, holy crap, this is this is bad. Colossus punches him and flings Data back, and Colossus is obviously shocked by this, that he wasn't just taken out. I'm not 100% sure why, because I know that he's encountered strong mutants before, so it really wouldn't be surprising. And if he was just punching a regular human at that strength, I mean, he would just turn him into mush. So I do think that's kind of funny. Then a little quick misunderstanding over the fight that normally happens when you have these teams ups is over pretty quickly because it moves on with the story. So that's kind of cool. It's just kind of over and done with, and we move on to the story and them teaming up. And Troy basically mentions that they're from a starship called the Enterprise, and Wolverine knows the Enterprise. He mentions the Enterprise. He mentions Kirk, and then Picard's like, oh, James Kirk. Okay, interesting. Then you get this big splash page with everybody kind of meeting and talking and chatting, and that's pretty cool. Again, here's a little editor's note down here in the corner. So they have a bunch of conversations, and then Kang shows up, Kang the Conqueror, which more people, at least normies, are starting to get to know who Kang is because he's been semi-introduced into the MCU at this point. He was in the Loki series, and I think he'll probably be making his way into the mainstream MCU movie, so most likely normies will start to know who Kang is. But this is Kang the Conqueror. He shows up. He basically says that the arrival of the Enterprise has collapsed the trans-dimensional barrier, causing a chain reaction, collapsing the two different universes in on each other, and that the X-Men and the Enterprise crew need to go and stop this. And he gives them a little device. It's like, hey, use this thing. And then he essentially leaves. Picard's asking if they can trust him. Storm's like, yeah, probably not, but we really don't have a choice. Then we got our teams kind of splitting off with a mixture of X-Men and the Enterprise crew, which is good. It might be more practical to kind of have one team go one place and the other team go the other place, maybe, but then it would be no fun. So I'm glad they mix up the teams. And the two teams you have here is Wolverine, Worf, Data, and Storm going off on their mission, and then Picard, Nightcrawler, Colossus, and Troy going off on their mission. Riker is in charge of the Enterprise and is on standby. So Picard's team with Colossus, Troy, and Nightcrawler show up, and guess where they are? They end up in Days of Future Past. So that is really cool. Then you just got a fight scene going on with a bunch of mutant haters and stuff like that, which segues into the Sentinels chasing them. And again, having Picard shoot phasers at Sentinels is something that I never knew that I always wanted. Then switching back to the Storm, Worf, Wolverine, and Data crew, they show up, and there's Borg. They're on a ship somewhere, and there's Borg. And they quickly discern where they're at, and that is the Battle of Wolf 359. And most Star Trek fans are going to know what that is. That is the Borg confrontation. Pretty pivotal in setting up Sisko's character for DS9, and obviously a very pivotal point in Picard's life as well. But the Borg never boarded any of the Starfleet ships during this battle, so they immediately discern, hey, there's something weird happening. And so they're fighting the Borg, and I don't really know if I buy Wolverine cutting through Borg tech with his bone claws. Again, I always hated the bone claws, but Worf's impressed by him. Well, Storm is actually the one who discerns why the Borg are here. It's because the Borg detected mutants, and the Borg sent like an away team of their own to go and assimilate the mutant that they detected, which is, Storm and Wolverine. But Storm quickly takes out the Borg, as well as she should. Picard jumps away from a Sentinel, and you just got this really cool scene. And, Colossus is just throwing giant rocks and knocking off heads. Man, I just love seeing the mutants fight Sentinels. Like, this is classic X-Men here. Then we go to Kang's ship, and then we get what we pretty much already determined and what the characters already knew, which is that they really can't trust Kang, and Kang's basically using them. Then Wesley Crusher and the Traveler show up, which TNG fans know who the Traveler is, but he's basically a time entity, essentially. They took Wesley under his wing. He was in the first season of Star Trek, and then he was in the last season of Star Trek. So he shows up with Wesley, and they tell the crew that, hey, we've detected what's happening with these realities. Then basically Wesley and the Traveler tell the crew that, your away teams are actually causing the disturbance, because basically the way the continuity is working out is the timelines healing themselves. So the anomalies are ways for the timeline to heal themselves by actually interfering and messing with them is actually causing the disruptions. So Kang basically tricked them. That we all knew that was going to happen. So the Traveler uses his manipulations and transports the ship. Then we go back to Battle of Wolf 359, and as I mentioned before, this is pivotal in setting up Sisko's arc for the DS9 show. And here you go, we actually get Sisko, like pre-facial hair, and this is when you hear the name Proud Star mentioned, and Proud Star is, of course, Warpath or Thunderbird or whatever name you want to utilize. And obviously Wolverine recognizes him and is like, wait a minute, why is John Proudstar here, and why is he in a Starfleet uniform? This is one of those anomalies. But Shadowcat and Wesley show up and basically explain what's happening, and they kind of let the story play out. Proudstar jumps in front of a shot, apparently, or something, an explosion of some sort, and he is killed in protecting Sisko. And obviously Kang's upset about this. Kang's upset about the interference from Crusher and the Traveler, and the X-Men and the Enterprise crew, and, well, he's got bigger problems because the Enterprise just showed up. I feel like they really didn't know what to do with Angel and Banshee because they just kind of are on the ship at this point. Then the Enterprise goes into battle against Kang. Back to Days of Future Past timeline, and we have Tasha Yar, a Star Trek character who is in Days of Future Past. So they are like, well, this is the anomaly, so we have to solve it. Again, there's a little editor's note. This is important. This is important for readers who don't know all this stuff to be able to have references back to something. Then some Borg Sentinels just bust in, and Tasha Yar gets taken out by Borg Sentinels, which is crazy. So they start fighting the Borg Sentinels. Shadowcat and Wesley show up, and Shadowcat takes out one of the Sentinels. And this is really the first time Shadowcat's kind of seeing the Days of Future Past, which she's kind of really tied to in the story. It's kind of cool that they actually show her emotional reaction to encountering this, because it didn't happen in the comics. So it's weird that you actually get to see this in kind of a sub out of continuity kind of thing. Then we go back to Kang's ship, and you got Riker and Banshee, and they're fighting their way through the ship. The Traveler transported them over there. The crew's back on the Enterprise, and their away mission worked. Kang's ship goes down. Then you kind of get your parting goodbyes, and right down here, this basically sets up for the novel Planet X that tells you right there, right at the end of the comic, that, hey, the rest of the story's in the novel Planet X. So This is really the second part of a 3-part Star Trek X-Men crossover, and yeah, it was really fun. And if you flip the page, you can see the writer wrote some things about making the crossover and some of that stuff, and there's a couple cool, pieces of art here at the back. And yeah, what a great fun comic. So yes, this comic is a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun going back and revisiting this. I hadn't read it in years, and I was like, you know what? I'd like to read this, talk about it, make a video on it, and it was a lot of fun. I can't wait to reread the novel as well, because that is actually really good. As far as the comic goes, I think that they covered a lot of area within 64 pages. It's crazy to me how much story they actually cover in such a brief amount of time, how nice and concise the story is. There's like 20 characters that they juggle pretty well. There's little moments and panels and sections where pretty much all of the main characters, the TNG crew and the X-Men, get moments to shine. I'd say Angel kind of gets shafted a little bit, and maybe Dr. Crusher's really not used all that much, but everybody else has little moments to shine in this comic, and that's not really easy to do when you're juggling 20 characters. They did a really good job juggling them and giving them all moments to shine. They gave us Days of Future Past, which fits in perfectly to the story that they're telling here in this comic, since that's kind of an alternate future, which kind of lines up to a lot of what Star Trek kind of covers. So that was a good choice there. It gave us Sentinels, and even gave us Borg Sentinels, which was pretty crazy. And Tasha Yar from Star Trek actually plugs in perfectly into the Days of Future Past timeline, and what they're trying to tell here and how that worked out was great. Giving us the Battle of Wolf 359. Star Trek fans know that it's a great moment to pick for them to go back in time, and because it gives us Borg, which everybody likes the Borg. Star Trek fans love the Borg, and Borg obviously versus the X-Men. It's something you never knew that you always wanted to see. And not only that, but going with Battle of Wolf 359, it also gives us Cisco, so we get a little bit of DS9 love in the comic, which is great. And obviously he fits perfectly into the Battle of Wolf 359, so you're hitting two really great story points there and things that people love from Star Trek. The Borg, Battle of Wolf 359, and Cisco. It really is a great comic, a lot of fun. Not only did it remind me of what I love about Star Trek, what I loved about X-Men, it also reminded me like why I collected comics in the first place, why I liked them. And the story from the comic is perfectly carried over into the novel. It really is. There's references back to the comic, but this is also a fairly self-contained story. I'd love to go back and revisit this at some point. I think it would make a great animated movie if they had decided to do that. If somehow Star Trek and X-Men could come together again, making an animated movie out of this novel would be great. If it had good writers and it stayed true to the actual story in the novel. Just 64 pages of goodness, and I highly recommend it if you're a fan of X-Men, if you're a fan of Star Trek. Try and get your hands on it. Online's your best bet. Local comic stores, you might be able to track one down if they have a good back issue section. But it really just depends. Pretty much the bigger comic stores, you might have a shot at it, but it's a pretty hot comic, so most likely online's your best bet if you want to actually read the story and maybe even check out the first one with Kirk, Spock, and Bones. And honestly, this was just a fun video to make. I really liked making this. It took a lot of editing, obviously, as you can tell from the section where I cover the story. But it was a lot of fun. I like talking about positive things. I don't really like talking about Star Trek, the state of Star Trek, the state of comics and X-Men and any of the other franchises. I really don't like talking about where they're at now, because I'm not really a fan of where they're at now. I like talking about positive things, and that's a lot of probably what I'm going to be doing on the channel, is looking back at some of the older stuff, because that's what I would rather talk about. So I hope you had fun checking out this video. If you want to see me review the first comic with the Kirk crossover, then let me know in the comments below. If there's enough people interested, I might go ahead and do that. I think that would be a lot of fun as well. I just want to thank my subscribers. You guys are awesome. If you're a new subscriber from my Star Trek videos, welcome. I do have some other Star Trek videos in the works for some things I'd like to talk about. I may even review some of the older episodes of DS9 and TNG. I think that'd be a lot of fun. But regardless, if you're an old subscriber or a new subscriber, I really do appreciate you guys being here. And if you're not a subscriber, please consider subscribing. We'll have some more positive videos like this, looking back at some really cool stuff. But I just want to thank everybody for checking this out. And if you like this video, please like, comment, share, subscribe, do all the YouTube stuff, or don't. I'm not a beggar. I'm YouTube64, and I always tell you the truth.